Hey guys, welcome back to the RLW show. I know it's been approximately 1 million years since my last episode, but I'm hoping to get back on track now. I literally was just talking in a one-on-one conversation with NT Wright about 2 hours ago. And for those of you who know who that is, it's kind of a big deal. I referenced him in maybe my very first epistemology video about critical realism. It was from him that I first heard that term. And he's one of my favorite authors. He's a Bible scholar, very influential. And he was giving a talk sort of at a church here. And a friend of mine invited me, and I got to go. And this was actually my second time meeting him. I met him 2 years ago when he gave a talk with Greg Boyd in DC. So I'm kind of hyped up now. I just finished talking to one of my heroes. I've literally read, I think, 11 books by him. I read part of one of his books this morning. I would have anyway. It's the book I'm reading right now. One cool thing is I am soon hoping to debate one of my friends, a Christian friend who has a philosophy degree himself, and we're going to be talking about theories of justice, which especially comes into light when you're talking about things like the atonement, what happened on the cross. How does Jesus's death affect salvation? Does one person apparently needs to suffer to make up the sin of another one? Obviously, it gets knotty when trying to figure out exactly what happened there, and there's philosophical questions. So this friend of mine, Brandon, you can look forward to, hopefully you can look forward to our debate. I got to talk him into letting me post it here. I'm hoping to. But he has a philosophy degree, and this is the way I like to explain how Brandon's an interesting guy. He is currently working at a funeral home because he wants to understand death better. So if that doesn't prove to you that he is of his own ilk, then I don't know what does. But he's super interesting, super smart guy. We get into intense philosophical discussions. He wraps my brain in a knot, and we have a great time. So we're going to be talking about theories of justice soon. And since I got to talk to NT Wright about it, so I'm going to see Wright, and I'm trying to think of what question to ask him if I get a chance to talk to him afterwards. And I realized, wait, I'm literally like next week going to be debating my friend Brandon about this. I might as well ask NT Wright. And Wright actually came out with a book on the Atonement just a year or two ago, called The Day the Revolution Began. So it's obviously at the forefront of his mind in a lot of ways. So anyway, the first question I asked him is, well, first of all, I mentioned that I had met him before when he talked with Greg Boyd, and so we chatted a little bit about that because he doesn't go all the way with Greg Boyd about some of his theories. Particularly, Greg Boyd came out with this book called Crucifixion of the Warrior God, and it would take us way off topic to go into that. But it's a really fascinating book that I read last year and loved. But he definitely goes out on a limb there. So Wright and I, Tom, as I call him, Tom and I chatted a little bit about that. And then I asked him, do you believe in retributive justice? Because that is what Brandon and I are going to be debating. And this is somewhat of a new topic for me. And in fact, when I say we're going to be debating this isn't something I'm fully sure of. So for me, at least, and I think for a degree, Brandon as well, it's a bit of a exploratory debate to try to both learn. But this is the basic issue is my understanding of retributive justice is this idea that there's this cosmic accounting book that needs to be evened out. And so when an injustice is done, we're in the red cosmically. And to bring justice, the perpetrator has to suffer an equal amount, and then we're back in the black. And the reason why I say accounting is because it really feels like you lost $5, we got to get $5 back. Now we're back to zero. And that just starts to feel really weird when you really go all the way in that direction, because it starts to feel like Brandon actually used the term, which I really like, cosmic catharsis. Like, did God experience cosmic catharsis by punishing Jesus on the cross? And in fact, N.T. Wright says that some packaging of the atonement, of specifically penal substitution, to get into very theological waters here, it ends up almost sounding like you're saying that God so hated the world that he killed his only son. And I know that sounds crazy, but I definitely have been to church services where they don't obviously say that, but it ends up sounding like that God needed to punch somebody, and Jesus said, "You can punch me." And there's a lot of things wrong with that, but one of them is like, why couldn't God just not punch someone? It gets very weird, and so that I'm debating against retributive justice. I'm going to be saying that a eye for an eye is not essential to justice. That other pieces of justice that we all would recognize are essential. For instance, like the evil act ceasing, that the truth is made known, that who was right and who was on the wrong. And obviously, in a practical sense, punishment can be a deterrence. It can be reforming. There's a lot of things going on there. But when it starts to sound like a cosmic accounting book, is the term I keep coming back to, it starts seeming weird. It's like, how does making this person suffer undo suffering that happened before that was wrong? Like, is it literally a mathematical equation? And just to give you just a peek behind the cover to show you some of the ways this plays out with regards to the atonement, and I'm going to reference some Greg Boyd videos in the comments to this episode, because he has a series of videos about this, and that actually was a big inspiration for this video series / podcast, was his videos, because he just would do these 5-7 minute videos that I really liked, talking about this sort of thing. So one issue is, if God is just balancing the books with Jesus, did he really forgive anyone? Because he still is getting his payment, it almost seems like. Now you end up with this paradox, because God is getting his payment, but his payment was himself, because it's the Son, and the Son is him, and it gets a little complicated, but it still feels a little weird. It's like, why could God simply what I would say, make the evil cease, but the forgiveness would involve not causing suffering to, especially an innocent person. That's where philosophically it gets really hairy. It's like, can an innocent person truly take the punishment justly for another? So, and I want to say once again, I'm not 100% one way or the other on this, but I do want to call into question some of the reductionist forms of penal substitution, is how I would put it. So I think one way of putting it, and this is a little bit of my own formulation, but I'm getting it from others ultimately, is I think Jesus was more of a Trojan horse. And so God was actually, in a sense, paying the enemy, paying Satan, but he was paying it with false money. It was a Trojan horse. Just like Paul says that if, I would have to look up the exact verse, I think it's in 1 Corinthians, that if Satan basically knew the secret of the cross, he wouldn't have killed Jesus, because it ended up being the undoing of evil. But clearly Satan felt like he was getting something. So it was a false payment to Satan that broke the evil spell on us. It really is, as Greg Boyd says, it's really the Narnia interpretation, that Aslan is dying in place of Edmund, and the payment is to the White Witch, except it's a false payment. It ends up being her undoing. So obviously there's so much you could unpack there. Oh, one other thing, there's so many interesting things about this, but another interesting thing is the only animal in the Old Testament sacrifices that had sins cast on them ritually was the scapegoat. And the scapegoat was not killed. It was driven out into the wilderness. The other animals, sins were not seen to be cast on them. And instead, it was simply seen that their blood in the sacrifice was cleansing. So at least that's what N.T. Wright says. And I've heard similar things from other authors. So there's just, it's not even clear what the ancient Israelites thought they were doing when they gave those sacrifices. Like it's not totally clear exactly what sort of exchange they thought was happening. Once again, according to N.T. Wright. And he says he's asked very well-known Old Testament scholars, and they basically said it's a bit of a mystery what the Israelites thought, how they conceptualized it. So anyway, really interesting stuff. And regardless, okay, we just talked a lot of theology and very Christianese speak. Regardless what you think of that, theories of justice are very, very relative. I mean, very relevant is what I was trying to say. I mean, there's just it's a core part of ethical theory. So hopefully, if we end up posting this debate, you would find it interesting. In fact, we're not even going to be focusing that much on the atonement, Jesus' atonement. I think we're going to be talking more generally anyway. But it's a very interesting topic. Like, take the extreme example, as always, Hitler. Like, Hitler always comes up with any moral argument. Does Hitler need to suffer the exact same amount that all the Jews he killed, all the people he made suffer? Does he need to experience the exact amount of suffering, and then we can check off the box that says justice was done? Like, and why? Why is there? How does that work? And I mean, one thing that's really tough about it is we're dealing with moral intuition. There's a bedrock of our moral intuition that we can't get beneath at some point. Obviously, on top of that bedrock, we can argue and explain and try to figure things out. But there is a bedrock. And so you end up, for instance, just take, I remember one of my philosophy friends said she was having trouble defining the word deserve. Like, what do you really mean that someone deserves that? And once again, like we feel like we know what it means, but we're getting very close to that bedrock of intuition, so it becomes hard to articulate. So that is coming up. I know, like I said, I know it's been like 6 months since or not quite that, but 6 months since that episode. I am going to be finishing the epistemology stuff. The next episode on that is going to be talking about the book by Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, one of my favorite books and maybe the most influential book on my epistemology. And it's not about Natalie Portman. It's about, well, my phone just buzzed. It's about epistemology. It's about dealing with the unknown. So we will be talking about that next. And then I also read, in the meantime, a book by John Loftus called The Outsider Test for Faith. It's my second book by John Loftus. He is an ex-Christian, ex-Evangelical pastor, now atheist. His blog name is Debunking Christianity. So if you want to know where he stands on things, that probably makes it pretty clear. His first book is called Why I Became an Atheist, and I would actually say it is the best overall onslaught against Christianity. It was a goal of mine for a long time to read it. It's pretty long. It's like 400 pages, so it was intimidating. But I read it probably 4 years ago or so, and it was talk about food for thought, man. Whew. And the Outsider Test for Faith is even more interesting to me in a lot of ways because he says so many things that I'm just like, yes, like, oh, like I 100% agree with him. And it's just that final step in the argument where I think that it doesn't debunk Christianity. In fact, for me, it affirms my epistemology, I would say. Just to give you a very quick preview of that, one thing he says over and over again, and I love, is possibilities. I'm going to mess up the exact phrasing because it's been a while, but he says, it doesn't matter what's possible, it matters what's probable. Probabilities are all that matter. And that sums up so much of my journey because fundamentalism, any sort of fundamentalism, will often retreat to the possible to explain something. Basically, they have their belief, whatever that belief is. Once again, to me, I define fundamentalism as really a way of holding a belief. It's setting out to prove what you already have decided beforehand. So, but any sort of fundamentalism, to try to intellectually justify it, they just need to find a possible way this could add up. But soon as you really deeply consider, is this actually likely? And I'm not even asking for 51%. Is it even 20%? A lot of times it's no. And so that was a lot of my journey because some of my earlier more wooden Christian beliefs, I would say, and just maybe philosophical beliefs in general, didn't survive that. I was like, no, this isn't probable. So it's interesting. Like I'm so with Loftus on that. In fact, I would also say you could take that same sort of mentality and apply it to a lot of miracle claims, which is something I still want to talk about soon, because I think it starts to that maxim of possibilities don't matter, probabilities do. I think that actually ends up being very favorable for miracle claims because there is such an overwhelming amount of testimony and even physical evidence, believe it or not. That's been a major research project for me for the past couple years. And it starts to seem like, yes, it's possible. Most of these are either lies or exaggerations or anomalies, but it starts to seem less and less probable. It starts to seem like you're explaining away the evidence. So anyway, we're going to talk about, I'm going to give a quick book review of The Outsider Test of Faith. I'd like to at least. And finally, I need to wrap up that dang series on Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. That's become a multi-year effort, but I've sort of treated that as a jumping off point of talking about broader topics in the debate between Christianity and atheism. So I've allowed it to kind of stretch out here, but I do want to wrap it up. I have 2 more posts to cover the last 4 chapters, and I will try to get those out there so we can move on to more things. And on another front, very quickly, on a music front, I had the privilege of writing the theme song to a friend's web series. The web series is called Susan's Senior Moments. I'm pretty sure if you just Google that, you can find the YouTube channel. It's going to be on YouTube is the platform. And it's coming out May 12th, I believe. So check that out. I wrote a little ragtime theme for it. So that should be a lot of fun. I might be contributing more in the future. And also check out my band. If you're in New York, Kaylor Otwell and the Tin Cans, or Kaylor and the Tin Cans. And that's our website, is Kaylor and the Tin Cans with a K. And we're playing on Long Island Memorial Day weekend, which should be a lot of fun. So anyway, guys, I'm back. I'm gonna be posting some more episodes. I'm gonna be talking to NT Wright more. I asked him out for some coffee. He turned me down, but that's not gonna stop me. So anyway, I promise I won't stalk anyone too badly. But yeah, I think that's it. All right, thanks. Bye. I just realized I don't think I actually said what NT Wright responded to my questions. So I asked him if he believed in retributive justice, and he basically said, well, it depends how you define that. And when we're trying to figure out what the Bible says about something like this. The Bible is a narrative, and so when you try to package it up into a single term, you're going to at least be in danger of distorting it. So it's funny, N.T. Wright, as much as I love his writing and what he's done, it can be very hard sometimes to even articulate his view on certain things because he refuses to summarize. And so you can just read this whole swath of his writing, and then I'll be like, I think I know what his belief on this is. And so I think that really is perhaps the only major drawback of his writing is that he just refuses to summarize, which there's a virtue in that because he does avoid a lot of the distortion that happens and a lot of the reductionistic tendencies we all have to try to just put it in a box and explain things simply. But it really is a problem because like I basically didn't fully get an answer from him. So he said that so I first related to him that, I agree with him about how it's problematic how at some churches you end up hearing God so hated the world that he killed his only son. And it sounds like this odd accounting that is happening that doesn't make much sense. And he agreed with that, saying, sure, yeah, that is, of course, that's going too far that direction. And then I presented the idea that Jesus is a Trojan horse. And to my delight, he said, if you read some of the early church fathers, they say exactly that. And in fact, I've heard it called the fishhook theory of atonement. I don't remember if I said that earlier in the video. But, and I think basically the ransom theory of atonement. And both the ransom theory and also the Christus Victor are really the dominant views of the early church, rather than penal substitution. So at least penal substitution wasn't the focal point early on, from what I understand. So anyway, N.T. Wright basically said, yes, there's at least some truth in the Trojan horse idea, but he wouldn't say, yes, it's wrong, this cosmic accounting is wrong, and yes, Jesus was a false payment to Satan and that sort of thing. You couldn't nail him down as usual, but he did. I think he was sympathetic to the fishhook or Trojan horse theory, at least, and of course he's sympathetic against the reductionistic presentation of penal substitution of God so hated the world that he killed his only son. Because that I don't know if I actually said that, but I got that phrase from N.T. Wright. That's something he references. So anyway, that is that.